June 9th, a wild ride through history, war, religion, assassinations, and talking cars. Welcome back to On This Day. Today's date is June 9th, 2025. It is the 160th day of the year. There are 205 days left. It is the 23rd Monday in the 24th week and the 82nd day of spring. You got 11 days till summer. If today's your birthday or you know one, its zodiac sign is a Gemini. All right, today is packed with all kinds of interesting stuff, so let's take a look at what June 9th has given us. 68 AD, Nero checks out, dramatically of course. If anyone was going to leave this world quoting Latin poetry, it would be Emperor Nero. On June 9th, he ended his own life after being declared a public enemy by the Roman Senate. And he didn't just go quietly. He quoted a couple Latin poems with classic Roman flair. His death brought down the curtain on the Julio-Claudian dynasty and kicked off the chaotic Year of Four Emperors, which was basically the Roman Empire's version of musical chairs, except the chair is a throne and everyone has a sword. 1856, Mormons hit the trail again. On this day, around 500 Mormons packed up their wagons in Iowa City and set off on the Mormon Trail. This wasn't your average weekend hike. This was part of a massive migration westward towards Utah. Armed with faith and handcarts, they were seeking religious freedom and better land. It was grueling, dangerous, and filled with hardships. But their journey helped shape the American West in a big way. Now, interesting thing, I just watched this Netflix show called American Primeval, and they really don't cast a positive life on the Mormons out west in Utah, especially Brigham Young. There's a lot of conspiracies out there about him. 1862, Stonewall Jackson wraps up his Shenandoah Valley campaign. Civil War history buffs know that on June 9th was a big deal for the Confederate General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. His Shenandoah Valley campaign ended with a big win at the Battle of Port Republic. His maneuvers tied up Union forces and they were considered some of the most brilliant in military history. Basically, he played chess while everyone else was playing with themselves, I guess. It bought the South time and gave the Union major headaches. 1863, the Battle of Brandy Station. Cavalry, chaos, and change of pace. Just 1 year later, on June 9th, the Battle of Brandy Station erupted in Virginia. This was the largest cavalry battle ever fought on American soil. Before this, the Confederate cavalry had been dominating the East, but after getting surprised by Union forces, that reputation took a serious hit. It was the Civil War's equivalent of getting caught napping and realizing your opponent brought the bigger horse. 1923, Bulgaria's military gets tired of having a democracy. Let's jump over to Europe, where Bulgaria decided that it had had enough of civilian leadership. On June 9th, 1923, the military carried out a coup and took over the government. This was one of several power struggles in the Balkans during the early 20th century, a region where coups were almost as common as folk dancing. 1954, Have You No Decency, Sir? A moment of televised political theater unfolded that would go down in history as the beginning of the end of Senator Joseph McCarthy's reign of fear. The setting was the Army McCarthy hearings, an explosive confrontation between the U.S. Army and the senator who made a name for himself by accusing everyone from government employees to Hollywood stars of being communist sympathizers, often with little or no evidence. McCarthy had spent the early 1950s fanning the flames of the Red Scare, ruining reputations, careers, and lives in his obsession to hunt with communists infiltrating American institutions. Now, this is the thing with that dude. I don't think he was as much interested in the communism. I just think he'd made some statements early on and realized he was getting some traction with this. And he just wrote it. He made it his thing. And at a point, I believe his fear he had put on the American public and the power that came with it sort of went to his head, and he just kept getting further and further into this. And eventually someone called him on it, and it was this point. But on that June day, it was McCarthy who found himself on the defensive. During a hearing, McCarthy launched a personal attack on a young lawyer named Fred Fisher, a member of the firm representing the Army. Fisher had briefly belonged to the National Lawyers Guild, an organization with alleged communist ties. In response, the Army's chief legal representative, Joseph N. Welch, had had enough. With millions of Americans watching live on television, a relatively new but powerful medium, Welch responded with a sentence that would echo through American history. "Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last? Have you left no sense of decency?" The room fell silent. McCarthy, usually the one dictating the narrative, stumbled and fumbled. It was a rare instance where someone stood up to him publicly, calmly, with moral clarity. And he did it in front of the entire nation. The phrase was not just a rebuke, it was a cultural turning point. The hearing had been televised for weeks, and the public support for McCarthy was already waning. But Welch's statement crystallized what many Americans were beginning to feel, that McCarthy's tactics had gone too far. In the days and weeks that followed, the tide continued to turn. McCarthy's approval rating plummeted, and by December of that year, the Senate formally censured him. He would never regain his influence and died just a few years later, politically disgraced and largely isolated. That one sentence from Welch wasn't just a zinger. It pulled back the curtain on McCarthy's demagoguery. It showed the power of standing up to bullies, and it reminded the nation that even in the heat of ideological fear, there must be a line. And on June 9, 1954, Americans watched as that line was finally drawn. I've always been fascinated with McCarthy, not in a good way. I just think he's a perfect example of someone that let some power go to his head, and he didn't want to let it go. So he just kept going with this same thing. And it went from people cheering him on to people going, oh, here, this guy again. 1959, the USS George Washington, the sub that carried nukes. The U.S. launched the USS George Washington on June 9th, the first nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine. It would carry 16 Polaris missiles, and it could stay underwater longer than your average sea creature. This was the peak of Cold War flexing, when nations measured power by how many nukes they could quietly sneak under the ocean. 1968, morning RFK. Following the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy just days earlier, President Lyndon B. Johnson declared June 9th as a national day of mourning. RFK's death stunned the nation. He was a symbol of hope and change during a turbulent era. The mourning wasn't just political, it was deeply personal for millions of Americans. 1973, Secretariat blows the field away. If you're into sports miracles, June 9th is your day. Secretariat didn't just win the Belmont Stakes, he annihilated the competition, finishing 31 lengths ahead and clinching the Triple Crown. People still talk about this like it happened yesterday. I am a big fan of the story. I like the movie, I like the history, and I just like Secretariat's story. But this race, the Belmont Stakes, which was the final race in the Triple Crown, was amazing. If someone wins by 2 lengths, it's a big deal. 10 lengths, freaking amazing. He beat the rest of the pack. The next nearest horse was 31 lengths behind him. He was so far ahead, the jockey, who they never turned to look behind them because it throws the horse off, he kind of thought something was wrong, he said, and he just got curious to see what happened to the other horses. Didn't realize they had so far behind him. He might have thought, I don't know, maybe everyone else stopped racing and he was making a mistake. I don't know what his deal was. But there's a famous picture of him looking over his shoulder at the competition. And they were way back there. Movies released on June 9th, 2006. Cars hit the theater. Yes. On the lighter side of things, Pixar's Cars was released on June 9th, 2006. Lightning McQueen zoomed onto the screen and into your hearts with his catchphrases and self-discovery road trip. While critics were mixed, kids loved it, and so did Disney's merchandising department. The film led to sequels, spin-offs, and a universe where tow trucks and tractors have feelings. Because why not? I always felt it was a little bit of a ripoff of Lidsville, if you remember that. It was like one of those Sid and Marty Krofft shows where the kid falls into a land and all the creatures there are actually hats that talked and stuff. It's just weird and 1970s stuff, but I always kind of felt this was, taking from that. But Cars was great. They even have a whole setup of it, what is it called, Radiator Springs at Disneyland, with rides and attractions all around Cars. Died on June 9th, 2017. We said farewell to Adam West. If you don't know who Adam West is, he was the original live-action Batman and the king of campy 1960s superhero charm. His deadpan delivery and iconic pow sound effect are still beloved today. For generations, he was the Batman before Batman got all brooding and serious. West died of leukemia in Los Angeles at the age of 88. Now, the guy that played Robin on Batman, Burt Ward, said, "This is a terribly unexpected loss of my lifelong friend. I will forever miss him. There are several fine actors who have portrayed Batman in films. In my eyes, there was only one real Batman, and that will always be Adam West. He was truly the Bright Knight." All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a great day, be nice to each other.